In 2005, a billionaire quietly bought a mountain in the Balkans. His plan wasn't to build a resort or mine for gold, but to create an entirely new country, complete with its own flag, laws, and passports. Today, we're diving into the bizarre and unfinished story of the man who tried to make his own nation from scratch. His name is Vít Jedlička. Born in Czech Republic in 1983, Jedlička wasn't your average millionaire tech founder or real estate tycoon. He made his name in politics and economics, not through generational wealth or corporate takeovers. He studied international relations and economics at university and grew increasingly disillusioned with how governments operated, particularly the role of the state in people's lives. That dissatisfaction eventually turned into action. He was a member of the Czech political party Free Citizen Party, which advocated for minimal government, personal liberty, and classical liberalism. But even that wasn't enough for him. He wanted to push the idea of freedom further, beyond borders, beyond regulation, beyond compromise. He was deeply influenced by libertarian thinkers like Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard. His worldview was rooted in the belief that governments are inherently bloated, corrupt, and inefficient. He didn't just want to critique systems, he wanted to replace them, and not through elections or policies, through architecture, economics, and design. Jedlička believed that if you want real change, you need to build something new, not metaphorically, literally. He saw modern states as outdated relics of history, forced constructs that limited human potential. His frustration wasn't abstract, it was personal. He had seen the slow pace of bureaucracy, the hidden taxes, the arbitrary rules, and he began to ask, what if we could start from scratch? What if you could take the best part of society, safety, infrastructure, freedom, and leave behind everything? His answer to that question wasn't just an idea or a white paper, it was a country. In 2015, he set his sights on a small patch of unclaimed land between Croatia and Serbia, known as Gornja Siga. Due to a long-standing border dispute, neither country had officially claimed it. To Jedlička, this was a loophole in the global system, a crack in the map that he could slip through. He traveled there, planted a flag, and declared it the Free Republic of Liberland. This wasn't a gimmick or performance art. Jedlička created a constitution, began offering citizenship, and drafted a framework for a voluntary tax system. He believed Liberland could become a real functioning country, one where people could live free of unnecessary government interference, a kind of libertarian paradise. The entire premise hinged on the idea that people, given the choice, would want to live in a nation where they kept more of their money, had fewer laws, and more personal freedom. His behavior often straddled the line between visionary and eccentric. He wore suits like a politician, but talked like a radical. He used formal legal language to justify what looked like an act of rebellion. At times, it felt like a TED Talk had collided with a protest movement, but underneath it all was a consistent, focused mission to prove that government as we know it could be replaced not by revolution, but by competition. What made Jedlička different from most so-called nation builders was that he wasn't seeking power or fame in the traditional sense. He wasn't building palaces or military compounds. He was handing out digital passports and posting his economic plans online. And yet he was dead serious. This wasn't satire, it wasn't theater. In his mind, Liberland was real, or at the very least it could become real if enough people believed in it. But this wasn't just some billionaire vanity project. He had a bigger idea in mind, something far more radical. In the rugged borderlands between Croatia and Serbia lies a stretch of land that at first glance looks like any other riverbank. Overgrown, unclaimed, and easy to miss, but for Vít Jedlička, this wasn't just a piece of forgotten terrain. It was a geopolitical blind spot, and more importantly, it was available. The land known as Gornja Siga exists because of a border dispute between the two countries. After the breakup of Yugoslavia, Croatia and Serbia began redrawing their boundaries, but their map didn't agree. Serbia claimed the Danube River as the natural border. Croatia, on the other hand, insisted on historical land borders, which followed a more irregular path. The result was a legal gray zone where certain areas, including Gornja Siga, were left out of both claims. Neither country wanted to claim it, because doing so would weaken their argument for more desirable land elsewhere. And so, for years, this 7 square kilometer patch remained in limbo, uninhabited, unmanaged, and technically unclaimed. To Jedlička, this wasn't a mistake, it was an opportunity. In April 2015, he traveled to the site, planted a flag, and declared it the Free Republic of Liberland. It wasn't about the resources or the landscape, it was about the loophole. This was a place that existed outside of the existing order, a kind of black canvas in a world with very few left. And unlike remote islands or Antarctic ice shelves, Gornja Siga was accessible. You could drive to it. It sat right on the Danube, one of Europe's key trade arteries, with major cities like Osijek and Novi Sad nearby. It wasn't paradise, but it was practical. Jedlička didn't buy the land in a traditional sense, because it technically wasn't owned. That was the entire point. Under international law, if a territory is terra nullius, or no one's land, then it can in theory be claimed by any individual. It's a rare and controversial idea, but not without precedent. He filed no purchase papers, signed no treaties, and dealt with no real estate agents. His claim was made through declaration, supported by legal arguments, historical documents, and a carefully worded constitution. It was less like buying property and more like filing a startup. His critics argued that the land still fell under Serbian or Croatian jurisdiction, depending on who you asked. But both governments refused to officially claim it, leaving Jedlička with just enough ambiguity to make his move. And he used that ambiguity to build momentum. Within weeks, applications for liberland citizenship began pouring in from around the world. What started as a symbolic act quickly turned into something much bigger, a global conversation about borders and what it really takes to start a country. The location wasn't just remote, it was legally confusing, and that's exactly what he was counting on. On April 13, 2015, Vít Jedlička stepped onto a muddy patch of unclaimed land between Croatia and Serbia, planted a flag into the soil, and made an announcement that would ripple through the internet within hours. A new country had just been born. He called it Liberland, a sovereign microstate, built from scratch with its own government, constitution, and a bold promise to become the freest nation on earth. The name wasn't random. Liber is Latin for free, and freedom was the whole point. Jedlička didn't just want a country, he wanted a fully functioning alternative to the states he saw as bloated and broken. He modeled Liberland's constitution after libertarian principles: minimal government, voluntary taxes, private property rights, and complete freedom of speech. The state would provide only the most basic functions, and everything else would be handled by free individuals and private contracts. It wasn't utopian, it was engineered. He assembled a government in exile almost immediately, appointing himself as president and filling out other positions with like-minded supporters from around Europe. They didn't have buildings or infrastructure, but they had titles, documents, and a digital presence. A website went live, applications for citizenship opened, and within days, tens of thousands of people from more than 100 countries were trying to join this new experiment. The flag was simple but symbolic: 3 horizontal stripes, yellow, black, and white, with a shield in the center. Each element was designed to reflect personal freedom, transparency, and the rejection of authoritarian rule. Even the state motto, "To live and let live," was a direct jab at traditional governments that tried to micromanage behavior and control thought. The media caught on fast. Articles popped on everywhere, from local Balkan news sites to global outlets like The Guardian and CNN. Some treated it as a quirky political stunt, others called it genius. On forums and social media, it exploded. Memes, debates, YouTube explainers, everyone seemed to have an opinion. For digital libertarians, Liberland felt like a beacon. For skeptics, it looked like a fantasy built on shaky legal ground. But everyone agreed on one thing: this wasn't normal. Officials in both Croatia and Serbia were far less amused. Croatian border police quickly blocked entry to the land, arresting Jedlička several times for illegal crossing. Serbia distanced itself, claiming the territory wasn't theirs to govern. Neither country recognized the claim, but neither officially asserted ownership either. which only fueled Yedlichka's argument that liberland was legitimate under international law. As the tension grew, so did the visibility. What started as a single flag in the dirt had now become a diplomatic gray area with thousands of digital citizens and a self-proclaimed president. But while he was designing a country, the outside world was starting to take notice, and not everyone was impressed. Liberland wasn't just a slogan or a thought experiment. Yedlichka went out of his way to make it feel like a functioning state. He didn't just declare it. His staff did, promoted it, and opened it up to the world. Within days of the announcement, his team began accepting applications for citizenship. They claimed to receive over 200,000 requests in the first few months. The application process asked for more than just basic information. Applicants had to agree with the values of the state: voluntary taxation, personal liberty, and minimal government. Criminals and communists, the website warned, need not apply. Passports were designed, printed, and even mailed to some supporters, although they weren't recognized by any country. Liberland also introduced a digital currency called merit, meant to reward citizens for contributions to the development of the state, anything from legal help to software development. There were no taxes unless you chose to pay, and paying wasn't just charity, it gave you more say in how things were run. It was in theory a merit-based democracy, part Silicon Valley, part Swiss banking, and part Reddit forum. Yedlichka organized virtual town halls, wrote policy drafts, and even set up diplomatic meetings. He attended liberty-themed conferences, spoke at blockchain summits, and met with fringe politicians across Europe and beyond. In his eyes, Liberland had all the internal elements of a real country. All that was missing was external recognition, so he tried to get it. He reached out to the United Nations, filed claims under international law, and approached nations that might be open to the idea. Countries with their own disputes or limited global clout. He made pitches to officials in Somaliland, South Sudan, and even Haiti. In some cases, they listened. In others, they laughed. No country formally recognized Liberland, but some offered vague gestures of support, invitations to talk, letters of intent, even photos with local leaders. It was all unofficial, but Yedlichka treated every nod as a momentum. There were no permanent residents in Liberland, mostly because access to the land was heavily restricted by Croatian border patrols. Attempts to enter often ended in arrest or forced removal. Still, supporters tried. Some camped nearby. Others built floating platforms in the Danube River to claim they were within Liberland waters. Online, the community was far more active, forming virtual governments and drafting proposals for when the land became accessible again. Whether Liberland was real or not depended entirely on how you defined real. It had laws, borders, leadership, and citizens, at least on paper, but it didn't have housing, utilities, or recognition. For some, it was a genuine attempt at building a new kind of state. For others, it was a digital performance, a clever stunt that said more about the internet than international law. The project was part political experiment, part art piece, and part business gamble. But keeping it alive came with a growing set of problems. From the beginning, Yedlichka knew he was testing the limits of international law. But as Liberland gained attention, the pushback became harder to ignore. Croatia, which bordered the disputed land, made its position clear. They didn't recognize Liberland, and they weren't going to tolerate what they saw as a stunt on their frontier. Croatian police quickly moved to block access to the area. Yedlichka and other Liberland supporters were repeatedly detained for attempting to enter the territory. Sometimes they were fined, other times just escorted out. But the message was always the same: stay out. The irony was that Croatia didn't officially claim the land either. By doing so, they risked weakening their border claims against Serbia. But they also didn't want a rogue microstate popping up in the middle of their legal gray zone. So they took the middle ground: block access without taking ownership. It was a strategy of silent control, and it worked. Liberland couldn't build anything without being stopped, couldn't bring in residents without arrest, and couldn't move forward without crossing a line. The legal fight never made it to the international courts, but it didn't have to. Yedlichka cited the Montevideo Convention, a 1933 treaty that defined the criteria for statehood: a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. On paper, liberland ticked the boxes. In practice, things were murkier. The defined territory was contested, the permanent population didn't exist, and the government was mostly online. International law, it turned out, wasn't a checklist, it was a network of recognition. And nobody in that network was backing Yadlichka. Private sovereignty sounds simple: buy land, declare independence, start fresh. But in reality, the concept hits a wall. Land ownership doesn't equal sovereignty. Even if you legally purchase land, the territory still falls under the jurisdiction of the country it lies within. In Liberland's case, Yadlichka wasn't even buying the land. He was claiming it through a loophole, relying on the fact that no one else had. That argument didn't hold up with regional authorities, and without enforcement power, it was hard to do anything about it. Other nations watched cautiously, some issued light warnings, others ignored it altogether. No one wanted to set a precedent by recognizing a micronation that popped up through legal ambiguity. The risk was too high. If Liberland could exist, what stopped anyone else from doing the same thing wherever a border dispute existed? The whole idea poked at the fragile fabric of nation-states, and most governments weren't in the mood for experiments. Eventually, the dream began to fade, not because Yadlichka gave up, but because reality caught up. A decade after its founding, Liberland still exists, mostly online. The website is active, mostly online. But the physical territory remains untouched, sealed off by Croatian authorities. Attempts to establish permanent structures have been shut down repeatedly, and entry into the land is still blocked. Rather than abandon the project, Yadlichka pivoted. The focus shifted from building on land to building in cyberspace. Liberland now markets itself as a cyber nation, exploring blockchain governance, decentralized ID systems, and digital infrastructure. The territory may be off limits, but the branding lives on. To supporters, Liberland became a symbol, a protest wrapped in a passport. To critics, it faded into internet mythology, grouped with other failed micronation experiments. Some still follow it religiously, while others barely remember it existed. Yadlichka claims he learned one thing above all: that creating a nation isn't about land, it's about legitimacy, and legitimacy takes time. And as strange as it sounds, this story is far from unique. Liberland joins a small but fascinating list of self-declared nations. Places like the Principality of Sealand, built on an abandoned sea fort, or the Republic of Molossia, which operates from a backyard in Nevada. These micronations rarely gain recognition, but they are not jokes. They reflect something deeper, a frustration with existing systems and a desire to build alternatives. People create them not because they expect to rival actual countries, but because they want to challenge the idea that borders and power are fixed. In a world dominated by nation-states, starting your own feels like the ultimate act of rebellion. For some, it's a political statement. For others, it's about control, freedom, or simply curiosity. Liberland stood out because it hit a moment when trust in governments was shrinking and interest in decentralized systems was growing. And while it hadn't become a functioning state, it still forced a real question: who decides what counts as a country? Would you live in a country made by a billionaire? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories just like this one.